And our next speaker today and this morning will be Nathaniel Wolfson. And Nathaniel?
Hi, sorry, I was muted. Stephen, can you see my screen? Augusto de Campos Black Box Poetics.
Yes, sim. Vendo sim.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to Stephen and to Cecily and Kate, to Michele, to the Transcreation team. I'm really happy to be here to share and to hear works about Augusto in this international venue and context. So I'm going to be in this presentation. I'm just going to time myself now. Going back in time a little bit to the 1960s and 1970s and to some more artisanal productions, and looking particularly at a dialogue between Augusto and an artist, Julio Plaza. Some of you will have been already made familiar with that relationship in some of those works, and hopefully some of you will be encountering them for the first time. And I'll just be showing you just a few, sort of a trajectory of their collaborations, and then ending with a work called Caixa Preta, Black Box, and hopefully contextualizing that work a little bit by thinking of why they might have been interested in that concept, that cybernetic concept of the black box. So Julio Plaza was a Spanish-born artist who came to Sao Paulo in 1973, and he became an important presence in the local art scene and within Brazil, especially working with technology and art. He started working in Sao Paulo, the University of Sao Paulo, in the multimedia department and the communications art school of the university, and he collaborated a lot, especially with Walter Zanini, who was the curator at the Museo de Arte Contemporânea in USP. They were involved in the 1970s in exhibitions on art and technology, mail art, postal art. Prospectiva 74 was an important exhibition they worked on together. Poéticas Visuais from 77. And he and Augusto started working together in the late 60s. And they were working together, thinking about what we've been talking about already in this conference, the play with signs, intermedial translations, what Augusto sometimes called a festa intersignica. And on the left, we find Julio Plaza with one of his works that is an homage to Duchamp, and Duchamp is actually a figure that both of them shared in common. Here we have a Calder artwork together with a Superman image, which in their book, their collaborative book on Duchamp, Augusto reveals as a sort of homage to a work that Duchamp himself did, mixing together a Courbet painting with a found image. And then on the right, we have the Cidade poem that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later today. And so this is Caixa Preta, the work that they did together in that was published in as a kind of as a rarity. There were 1,000 editions of them in 1974. And I'll be returning to that. I should say that if I had more time, I would want to situate a little bit this art in a broader context of the reception of cybernetics in Brazil in the 1960s, which is a topic that really interests me in my own research. So I'm thinking there of poems that are playing with the idea of algorithmic production, not necessarily using them, although some of them did. If we think about the collaborations with Décio Pignatari and Luiz Angelo Pinto in the late 1960s, or Valdemar Cordeiro, or Giorgio Moscati, who are using early forms of computing to make art, but also even Haroldo de Campos's Alea series, which is playing with the idea of an algorithmically generated artwork or poem in a kind of comedic way. So that would be the larger context for this discussion. So I'll be returning again to these works here, Caixa Preta, which was a kind of an object that included various works in translation. So I just wanted to read from a quote about what the black box is that I'll be returning to later on. And this is from a book by Ross Ashby, where he describes what the black box is, an introduction to cybernetics. So he says, the problem of the black box arose in electrical engineering. The engineer is given a sealed box that has terminals for input, to which he may bring any voltages, shocks, or other disturbances he pleases, and terminals for output, from which he may observe what he can. He is to deduce what he can of its contents. Black box theory is, however, even wider in application than these professional studies. The child who tries to open a door has to manipulate the handle, the input, so as to produce the desired movement of the latch. And he has to learn how to control the one by the other without being able to see the internal mechanisms that links them. In our daily lives, we are confronted at every turn with systems whose internal mechanisms are not fully open to inspection and which must be treated by the methods appropriate to the black box. And this concept has taken on a life of its own in different kinds of social theories. But the idea basically is that we're encountered with these objects that we do not know, and we have to use them in order to figure out how they work. I'm going to just skip this slide for the sake of time here. That continues from that same text. So Augusto de Campos, in a catalog essay from 2003 called Entry, talks about some of the objects that he made with Julio Plaza in ways that kind of remind me of this idea of the black box. He says, espanhol de nascimento brasileiro por escolha, Julio Plaza, que a morte inesperada colheu algumas meses atrás, aos 65 anos, engajou-se praticamente em todos os desenvolvimentos tecnológicos, as artes do videotex, arte digital, pioneiro que foi a muitas dessas experiências envolvendo novos suportes, I think that's a typo, a partir da própria reconfiguração do livro. Foi ele também um importante estudioso e teórico da tradução intersemiótica. O nosso foi um encontro de irmãos de alma. O seu radicalismo o afastou do mercado artístico e o manteve em nobre isolamento. Mas o seu pioneirismo se traduziu em experiências que consubstanciam o esforço de colocar a arte no limite do olho e da forma, e a poesia na aventura extrema do entre em terra incógnita ainda a explorar. So this idea of the bringing together of the eye, the forms, the entry between these different semiotic states as a terra incognita, this unknowable space that needs to be explored. So if we can think about the unknowable space of the intersemiotic artwork as a kind of black box, that's my conjecture. And so here I just wanted to bring to your attention an exhibition by a curator who works a lot with Plaza and intersemiotic translation, this period of art in the 1970s called Terra Incognita, that thinks about art from Latin America, in general from South America, as an unknown space, thinking of the colonial imaginary of Latin America. And so perhaps even to think about sign work or this festa intersignica that comes from Latin America specifically as a kind of unknown territory is something that interests me. Whereas we tend to think about signs as a kind of abstract or universal language, what gives it its specificity in the context of Latin America is, I think, something that Augusto is interested in. So the collaborations began with Objetos, which was from 1968, in which Julio Plaza showed Augusto some of his works, and Augusto asked him to write a catalog entry. And instead of writing the entry, Augusto decided to create a poem, as we might imagine he would have done. So these are the objects that Julio Plaza made, these sort of three-dimensional forms that are created out of the manipulation of paper using these primary colors. And I think there's a nod here to the Russian constructivist artist Rodchenko, who was also using a kind of unfolding of materials in order to create different planes and volumes. And so instead of writing in discursive language, a text, Augusto de Campos decided to make a poem using a maquette that Plaza provided to him that played with the idea of color and language, discussing sort of how, or by opening up words such as yellow or red and bringing colors between them, he's opening up the sign of the word and showing how the different signifiers can have a kind of material property through color and through tactility. So that's the beginning of what will be a long and interesting dynamic relationship between these two. I realize I have to go quickly now. So I'm going to keep on going. So here we have Poemobilis, which is another work that they did together that was kind of taking original poems and putting them into three-dimensional form so that there's a tactile dimension where users are holding them. So why are these black boxes, just to finish up? Well, I think that Augusto is interested in the kind of unknowability of the interior of the poem. This is a common theme that we encounter in his work. And we heard Eduardo talk about the materialidade de não, right? This kind of illegibility or refusal. And so as the interaction with the work opens up the work, we still encounter problems of access and illegibility as a viewer. And so as the viewer manipulates these works, they encounter problems of reading at the same time that they enter into them. So in this particular work here, we have a work called Entry. The poem clearly illustrates the point of being opened up. You encounter Entry, but also it's split horizontally. So printed underneath, we have ver, ter, sub. The layers of meaning begin to unfold. The structure of the object quite literally illustrates the idea of entrever, to glimpse. But entrever also means to guess or to have a kind of prescience that lies outside the realm of rationality, or it involves the senses. So other combinations of letters here involve a form of tension. We have entreter, which is a kind of playful entertainment, but also a suspension or delaying. Verter, on the other hand, denotes a pouring out. We have sub, which unlike the other words contained, cannot be combined grammatically with entry, which reveals entry as a kind of command or an ushering in to the poem's hidden layers of meanings. Finally, within Caixa Preta, just to close, and these are, I didn't have time to mention the links between this work and Duchamp's similar objects contained within a box. We have one translation, which is of this Cidade poem by Augusto de Campos from 1963, which was rendered into perforated discs by the early computer artist Erthos Albino de Souza, in which he took the letters from this poem and turned them into code. And this is one of the objects that was contained within the Caixa Preta series as well. Okay, I'm going to stop now, but I would love to go back to some of these things in the Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel, for your presentation.